Welcome to Charging the Agency Frontier. Today's guest is Kelly Campbell. She is agency growth consultant and a good friend of mine. Really happy to have her here and really just share some insights with our audience of primarily agency owners. Kelly, can you just give us a little bit of background about yourself?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me, Robby. I'm super excited about this. So my background is that I owned a digital agency in New York for about 14 years. I sold that in 2016, and then I sort of took a step back and tried to figure out what was aligned with my personal passions, my expertise, and all of that. And I realized that I wanted to help other agency owners to navigate growth, figure out, what they were doing wrong in the business and how they could ultimately set up a life and a business that would allow them to kind of pursue their own personal passions and things like that. So it's really rewarding. And I have a resource roster that I also pair very specialized people with. Different agency needs, things like that. But if I used to say that owning my agency was my dream job, and now I kind of look at that 14 years as the foundation for this dream job. So I'm really, really grateful.
Awesome. And then I know I get a fair amount of agency friends that are looking for coaches, looking for consultants. And sometimes it's, I want to scale. I want to work on my operational side of the business. Sometimes it's, I want to grow. I want to look at my new business. I want to look at my program, what I'm doing. What is your kind of primary focus area as a consultant?
Yeah, so I primarily focus with creative and technology agencies who are in transition. So they've got something going on with the business. They've probably been in business for somewhere between 5 and 50 years. So more established for sure. And they're just going through some sort of plateau or growth pains or trying to get into a new market. They don't understand positioning. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about that today.
Yeah. So positioning, let's dive right in. Positioning is talk of the town in the agency world, and a lot of agency coaches love to talk about positioning as kind of the first big step. It's a big deal for agencies. But what exactly do we mean when we talk about positioning when it comes to creative and technology agencies like the ones that you work with, and what are the implications of poor positioning versus strong positioning in the agency marketplace?
Yeah. So I think the easiest way to understand positioning, because you're right, it's a term that gets thrown around so easily. And I think having an understanding of what we mean by it is a really great place to start. So I look at positioning and define it as a deep expertise in a vertical or a set of verticals, right? So there are a lot of agencies that say, hey, we're a digital agency and we serve small to medium-sized businesses. We focus on B2B, B2C, nonprofit, government. That's not positioning. That's
Right.
actually the antithesis of positioning. So we're talking about deep expertise in one or a couple of verticals, because it doesn't, you don't have to be really niched down that far. But the more narrow you go, obviously, the more well-positioned you are. And the implications of that for an agency are only positive. There's nothing negative to really strong positioning. So a couple of things would be, if you have a strong positioned or a well-positioned agency, you attract ideal clients, right? Versus a poorer positioned agency, you have tons of clients that just, they're resource drains. They're not profitable, right? So from a client standpoint, and then that sort of parlays into pricing. When you're really well positioned, you can attract and garner premium pricing. So pricing becomes less of a conversation. It just becomes, hey, this is such a good fit, and you guys have such expertise in this area that we're looking for. The pricing is really not so much of a negotiation, not so much of a discussion. It's just, okay, we understand that this is your expertise, this is how you can help us, and this is how you've helped others just like us. So we expect to pay a premium because this is your focus. When you have a poorly positioned agency, it becomes more of a commodity. You might be looked at as more of a production house or just a tactical execution team. And then at that point, it's like buying a car. You're going to go to whichever dealership gives you the best price. So that's not the seat that you want to be sitting in, clearly. And I think the third thing, and there are so many benefits of it, but I would say the third thing of importance for me is a really well-positioned agency tends to attract better talent, and it has a stronger culture versus tons of high turnover where you're bringing in employees, they're leaving because it's just not a fit. They don't see the vision. They don't see the the niche for that particular agency. So
there's nothing for them to attach themselves to.
Nothing for them to attach themselves to. Even if you have a mission and a vision statement and you have core values, it's really hard to sink your teeth into anything meaningful as an employee if that agency is not well positioned.
Yeah. What is, I'm going a little off topic here, but staying on topic, but off the rails as far as the questions I have prepared. But in terms of positioning, what do you think is the big fear that's kind of preventing agencies from taking a more narrow approach to their offering and a narrow approach to their capabilities, the people that they serve, that kind of thing? Is it fear that of the business that they're going to lose as a result of placing a flag in the sand and saying, I am this, not all these other things, or what is it?
So for me, the two biggest things, I would say the first bucket would be creatives in general. We fear boredom and we fear boxes. So when you hear as an agency owner or an agency leader that I have to pick a lane, that scares them from the standpoint of, oh, I'm going to always have to work with the same type of company or the same type of industry. The reality is that we know every client is completely different. It comes with a unique set of challenges, and how you address those challenges from a strategy standpoint is completely different. So you're never going to be bored and you're never going to feel boxed in. I think that's just something that we tell ourselves when we think, oh, we've got to pick a lane, right? Because creatives love to create. We love to be expressive. We love to just do great work. And the diversity of that work is kind of what breeds more creativity. So that to me is sort of that first bucket. And then the second bucket is exactly what you hit on. Nobody likes to leave money on the table. And what I typically say to that is when you have a really strongly positioned agency, it means that the vast majority, let's say 85% of the work that you're doing is in that particular vertical. That doesn't mean that if there's a project that comes along that's kind of ancillary to that vertical, that you can't take it on. If you're a B2B marketing agency, would you take on a nonprofit? That doesn't make sense. But if it's a B2B organization that's maybe in the technology space, yeah, maybe that makes more sense. Anyway, the point is that I think leaving the money on the table and fearing that lack of creativity that's going to ensue based on positioning, I think that's just, it's a misnomer.
Yeah. I think it's interesting as an agency matchmaker, when I'm making matches and essentially evaluating agencies for who's the best fit, definitely positioning is what it really comes down to, because I'm looking for capability, but I'm looking for category experience. And it's typically the very narrow focused agencies that stand out, that make the tuning fork go off. And I'm like, that's going to be a clear win from a match perspective versus the agencies that say, oh, we can do it all. And then they're wondering why they're not getting matched up with more opportunities. And it's because they're not standing out. They're just kind of blending in as a commodity. And I know that from a sales perspective, if I put them in front of the brand with a bunch of other agencies that have more of a specialization, it's just, they're not even going to be able to contend. So
yeah. I mean, it's a good point. It's I think Jason Swank sort of calls it like the Me Too agency, and that's what it is. It's like, yeah, we do that. Yes, we do video, we do social, we do websites, we do this, and we do it for like literally everybody across the board. What happens in situations like that, exactly what you're talking about, is that it's really hard for that prospect to see themselves within your mission, or they're within your mission, but also within your client roster, within your capabilities, because there's nothing for them to grab onto. That makes sense.
All right, so let's talk about how positioning plays a role in business development, as that's a big area that agencies are obviously concerned with, is their business development program and generating leads and opportunities. What kind of role does positioning play there?
It plays the role is everything. So again, back to how critical getting the positioning is. It's going to go across the board from talent attraction to business development. So for me, if you understand exactly who you're serving and you understand who the buyer personas are, business development becomes really, really easy. And you can have a lot of fun with it and you can get very creative with it. Because if you know every little thing about that prospect, you know what their mindset is, their motivation, you know what questions they're going to ask, ultimately what they're looking for in order to help make their role in their organization easier. If you know all of those things, you can have a really relevant conversation that's about that prospect. So knowing all of that comes from the positioning, and then you put the buyer personas together. And those could be, let's say, CMOs at consumer packaged goods companies, right? If I know that that buyer persona, based on what their, like I said before, mindset, motivation, the questions, if I know that going in, I can start doing things like, LinkedIn outreach, whether that's in mail or just connection requests. I can do warm email. I can do so many things and put great content in front of them and start to develop and nurture that relationship. So again, I think it's really important to have that positioning, and then that goes into the deep expertise. So some of the things that I might put in front of that prospect would be, from a content marketing perspective, maybe a case study on some work that we did, clearly in the same vertical. That's obviously not a competitor, but someone in that same space to say, hey, this is what the client came to us with. This is how we addressed it, and these are the results that we provided to them or got on their behalf. And so sending them content from that perspective gives them a really good sense of who you are. And I think it just opens up those conversations, and the opening of the conversations is almost more important than the closing.
Love it. Love that line. So what are the most common kind of umbrella terms or overused language that agencies use when talking about themselves? I know there's a lot of cliche stuff that's out there. So what should agencies avoid?
Yeah. So right off the bat, my top two are going to be integrated. You're an integrated marketing agency. What does that actually mean? And full service, whether that's full service marketing or full service digital marketing, doesn't really matter. I'm almost getting to the point now, like 3 years into this, where I don't even love the term digital agency anymore, because every agency has to have some kind of digital component.
Yeah. What does that mean?
Right. So I think getting even more granular is probably, the direction that all of this is going into. I had a call the other day with a company in Halifax in Nova Scotia, and they're an influencer, a micro influencer marketing company for universities. And I was like, you guys are awesome. I mean, they're 7 months into the business, and they've realized that there's market opportunity. They have deep expertise in this area. They're getting great clients because of it, and the clients are paying premium pricing. So it's just, it just goes to show you that really is, moving away from these umbrella terms that really don't mean anything. You could get away with that 4 or 5 years ago, but I don't think so anymore.
I would have to agree. Just from my experience, there was an agency yesterday or the day before that inquired about doing a review and vetting process, and basically turned them down because they were full service. They're small but full service, and that was their positioning, was full service integrated. We can do it all, and it's just, it doesn't add a lot of value to our collective because it's really specialized. But even from a just modern advertising perspective, agency perspective, I have to totally agree with you. I mean, my eyes kind of roll when I hear full service, or like, what does that mean? What does digital agency, as you said, mean? It's really the very specific, social media marketing agency. Even social media is so broad that you can get an influencer or social media community management or paid advertising, or lots of different pieces there. So
yeah, it's all about the, sort of niching down.
Yep. All right. What can agency leaders do to begin working on their business instead of in their business, which is, always the goal, and set themselves up for future success?
So I think it's important, like when you ask a question like that, it's important to understand from the agency owner's perspective, like what success means, because success is defined, so differently from each and every person. If the agency leader is looking to eventually exit the business, I think, and obviously I get a lot of that with the inquiries that I get from agency owners. I would say, if they're not delegating the majority of the work, like if they're still in the weeds, if they're still in day-to-day, they're overseeing, projects, and they're even doing like some project management, or they're just so entrenched in the day-to-day, you have to start delegating right away. In a strategic way. I mean, obviously you have people on your team that you trust, and that's another portion of this, is trusting your team more, but getting most of that off of your plate so that you can really be that visionary. You can be that leader that, just drives the culture forward. Make sure that things are on track, make sure that you're vetting opportunities, again, from that really high level. For me, I think having the client relationship sometimes even solely with the owner is a problem, because when you go for a potential acquisition or something along those lines.
We want you to stay on board for 3 years or 5 years.
Yeah, exactly. It's probably going to be a situation where you get a little bit of an earnout and then, a little bit of a lump sum and then an earnout over a longer period of time. I even heard the other day, one of the agency owners that I was working with, when they exited their firm, they got, I think it was a 4-year earnout. I'm like, unless you're okay with that and there's like a very specific reason for that, that's a really long time. So I think the less that you're involved in the business, the better it is, especially if you're looking for that acquisition. And I think even if you're not looking for the acquisition, trusting your team more and getting more off of your plate is always going to be a positive thing, right? It's going to allow you to do a lot more in your life, pursue maybe some other personal passions, or just bring that higher level expertise, and vision to the agency.
Love it. Love it. So you work with a lot of agencies, obviously. What do you hear most from owners in terms of what they want more from out of life, or what their goals are, what brings them meaning, what brings them happiness?
Yeah, I think because I work with established agencies, these are not kids, right? So they've got children, they've got spouses at home, they want to travel. Agency owners are human. I think sometimes superhuman, but they're human, right? So all we want is time with our friends and family and loved ones. And I think that's probably the overwhelming response that I get when I'm doing an initial intake with an agency owner. And I'm like, all right, well, at the end of the day, like, what's the end goal? What do you want more? If you're working 60 hours a week now, what do you want that to look like in 3 years? And if they're coming back with, well, I'd love to be working like 20 or 30 hours a week so that I can spend time with my family, finally go on a vacation for 2 or 3 weeks, when that's been sort of unattainable for them up to this point, that's really what they're looking for. I think it's just human connection and quality time.
Awesome. All right. So switching gears, you've been hosting Thrive, which is your podcast for agency leaders. You've been doing it for over a year now. I was on a recent episode forthcoming, but or maybe coming before this, we'll see. But what can we expect from your show in 2019, and what can agency owners get from it?
So your previous question was actually a really interesting segue to this, even though you didn't know that. I think that the content is actually going to start to shift more toward that, more toward the how do agency owners actually get to that place where they are pursuing their personal passions, they are spending more time with their family. Maybe they're, sort of interested in spiritual development. Maybe they're trying to become more mindful in their lives, like just a more holistic, viewpoint, more meaningful life in general. I think the content is going to start to shift toward that a little bit more. And we're probably going to be bringing more agency owners on, as opposed to, some of the software companies and things like that, because I think it has been traditionally focused on more tactics and, sales tips and, things like that. We've really covered the gamut in terms of topics, but I think the majority of the content is going to start to shift for, looking at the more human side of agency ownership, and then eventually exiting and, just living your purpose. Love it.
Love it. And then you're writing your first book, I believe, coming to market soon.
Yes. So this is a brand new endeavor for me. So this entire year of 2019, I'm going to be spending a lot of time writing it. And there's a sort of a working title, but I'm sure that's going to change a couple of times. But the idea is basically, how do creative entrepreneurs release ego and reveal purpose? So again, it's kind of in line with what's going to happen with the podcast. I think the book will be a nice transition to that. And I'm interviewing I'll probably interview about a dozen different people, but in the book, there'll probably be about 7 or 8 people featured. I'll tell my story a little bit, and then have the chance to tell some of these other creative entrepreneurial stories, mostly agency owners. So there definitely will be a tie-in there. But I think it's going to take a very interesting turn. And I look at it as sort of the bridge between, I hate the word self-help because it's just such a weird, bookstore section name, but I think it's a bridge between sort of self-help and business. And I don't think anything like that exists yet. And there certainly has been a lot of stigma around that. If you're focused on business, you read business books. If you're focused on personal, you read personal books. And I actually don't think that there's a way to not have that as a true overlap between the two. So I want to start those conversations more.
I love that. I love those types of conversations. I've not in advertising, but I've had some talks around mental health and entrepreneurship and how those two go hand in hand, and talking about that real side, reducing stigma. It makes a big impact, and it's something that people need to be more open about. And I know in the advertising industry, it's I'll never forget, I owned an agency, but also, led a few agencies, and just remember, people literally crying in the bathroom, because they were so stressed out because of whatever's going on. And just, the toll it takes on you and your family and the owners. And it's a tough business to be in. There's times where I've thought to myself, like, why didn't I choose something simple like a car wash or, a cash cow type business?
Yeah.
And I'm sure other agency owners feel the same way sometimes. Like, why did I choose such a hard business to be in? Because sometimes it can be difficult. So
yeah. Agency ownership is not for the faint of heart. Anyone who's listening to this knows that already. I always like to joke around that it could either be a living nightmare or lead to a spiritual awakening. And that's literally how I describe my journey. So I think it'll be a really important conversation, and I'm looking forward to seeing, kind of what happens and what comes out of that, and how much impact that makes on the lives of the agency owners who might read it. So that'll be out in 2020.
Awesome. So how can agency owners reach you? How can they learn about you? How can they go to learn more about your podcast, stay in touch? Maybe they want to schedule a conversation.
Actually, everything that you just mentioned can all be found through my website, and it's just klcampbell.com.
Awesome. Simple. Easy.
Simple.
Cool. All right. And I want to say Kelly, as well as a member of our agency stable, our community of agency owners. And so definitely be posting that video there, but happy to have her in that community and giving her advice and sharing her wisdom, and appreciate, again, you coming on the show and talking positioning and new biz and about your podcast and book and all that good stuff. And just appreciate the time.
Thanks, Robby. Pleasure was all mine.
All right. Thanks, Kelly.
Bye.